Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you to this virtual roundtable session with us and GitLab, our business partner for today. The topic today is GitOps, the future of infrastructure automation. This is a panel discussion with HashiCorp, plat4mation, and GitLab. My name is Chandan Nallal, and I want to welcome all of you to the session today. To begin with, let me introduce the topic a little bit more, GitOps, the future of infrastructure automation. In today's session, we will all learn about how GitOps is changing the landscape of infrastructure management, what successful GitOps looks like, what teams need to get started on their GitOps journey, and specifically what these three companies, HashiCorp, plat4mation, and GitLab, offer the market for successful GitOps transformation. I think we're up for a very interesting panel discussion session with all of our expert speakers. So let me go over to the speakers and request them each to introduce themselves. I'll start with William Chia.
Hello, my name is William. I am very pleased to be here with the audience today. I am located in Austin, Texas, and I am a GitOps evangelist at GitLab. So mostly I get to work with GitLab's customers that are using GitOps or cloud native technologies like Kubernetes, talking a lot about what features are beneficial to them and what kind of challenges they have to solve. And then at GitLab, I do a lot of work on our go-to-market motions. And Nico.
Hi, the full name is Nicolas Correlio, so I would honestly urge you to call me Nico. I'm the Regional Director for Solutions Engineering here at HashiCorp. So before my sort of current role, where I'm managing a team of about 27 brilliant individuals that are helping people across EMEA, I was a very darn good solution engineer, and they still let me play with tech every once in a while. So as you can imagine, the topic of the panel today has been particularly dear to my heart, as we were sharing some stories while we were preparing of my previous life, mostly doing ITIL procedures. So back to you, William.
Really pleased to have Nico on board, and also would like Guus to introduce himself.
Yes, hello. Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Guus. With the funny G. I work with plat4mation, and I am our enterprise DevOps stream lead. So what we do mostly is we do consultancy and building applications on top of the ServiceNow platform, and I particularly specialize in all the enterprise DevOps or the DevOps related practices, and of course also GitOps falls within that bucket. So yeah, excited to be talking to you guys about all the fun that we can have with GitOps.
So I'm really excited to chat about the topic today. And as we kind of have discussion, Guus and Nico and I, we've had some pre-conversations about GitOps. I think this, as Nico said, is something we're all very passionate about. And before we dive into it, what we would like to understand is where you are at as an audience with GitOps. So I think there are some general concepts. It's around infrastructure, automation, storing your state in a Git repository, and automating that using all kinds of different tools that we'll talk about. But we would love to start off with a poll question. And Chandan, if you can launch the poll question for the audience. The question is really, where are you at with GitOps? And probably tend to think about this question from the perspective of your business organization. Of course, if you're attending this session and you're thinking of yourself as thinking about GitOps for maybe an open source project you're working on or a personal project, it's okay to answer from that perspective as well. But from the perspective of the organization that you are in, have you maybe you haven't explored it yet at all? Maybe you've started to look into GitOps, but you haven't really committed to any GitOps practices. Perhaps you've done a lot of GitOps research already and you have a plan to implement it, or perhaps you're already using GitOps today. And so go ahead and click into the poll answers there, and we'll give it just about a moment. And we'll show the answers to you as well to see who's on the call. So it looks like a majority of the folks on the call, thank you everybody who's provided the response there. Let's go ahead and close the poll out and take a look at the answers. This way, as Nico and Hus and I were taking a look, we'll see who you are. So it looks like majority of folks on the call, this is a new topic, have not yet explored it. This is very exciting because you've come to the right place.
We can win some souls.
Hearts and minds, hearts and minds.
The basics and the rundown and everything you need to know to get started, and even some places to look further. And it looks like we also have a meaningful chunk, about a fifth of the audience today, that is already using GitOps. And so what we would love is any questions across the spectrum. As we're having a conversation today, any questions that you have, please do type them into the Q&A feature. And at the end of the session, we'll take some of your questions and answer those. And so feel free to ask anything at all, from the very basics to, if you are using a GitOps implementation, we'll do our best. Maybe we won't know the answer in particular, but we would love even in-depth questions from folks that are using GitOps a lot. So from that, I would love to just, we can take the poll off the screen and jump into the conversation. And of course, the first question is, this is a new term, and like many new terms in industry, different people can define it a bit differently. So for those of us on the call, how do you define GitOps in your organization? How do you talk about it?
I'll just go ahead and take a start. You know, I've been working with organizations that are looking into transitioning into GitOps for a while, not only in kind of my current role, but in my previous role, I worked at a company that did configuration management software. It's not a secret, it's in my LinkedIn. But ultimately, you know, we start with that concept of how do we take a new approach to, you know, mostly infrastructure changes. If we look at sort of my past, when I used to be a system administrator, now you call them SREs or some other fancy titles, but you know, back in the day when I used to be a system administrator, our sort of systems of coordination for changes were mostly based on ITIL procedures, but some sort of loose interpretation of that ITIL procedures, where effectively, when I was working at this very large organization that has 3 letters, again, on my LinkedIn, if you're curious, you know, I was part of a system administration group, and we had to interact with people managing, you know, potentially storage or databases or networking and so on. So I remember weekly going into these 2-hour long, you know, change advisory board meetings, where effectively someone went and just said, hey, here's a change I want to do. If you have any questions, please ask me. If not, go ahead and approve that change. And it was always very hard to get the full context of, you know, or the right information in terms of understanding how is this going to impact me and my role. I think the beauty of GitOps is, first, it allows us to have a clear versioning of, you know, all the iteration of changes that we had through infrastructure. The second aspect is the collaboration aspect. I immediately see what the change, not only what the change is, but what the change is actually going to be. How is it going to be implemented? The tooling, potentially, if you're using, I know, I don't want to name drop Terraform, but if you're using Terraform, you're actually seeing the code and seeing effectively what is going to change. It just gives you a greater degree of visibility and collaboration within an organization, and it turns a process that used to be tedious, interacting with our teams, you know, when doing a change, to something that is actually very, very virtuous and ultimately drives uptime, which is what you want to do if you're in operation.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good, some good points you mentioned there, and I think also if I have a look at it from our perspective, almost all the stuff we do is with ServiceNow or ServiceNow related, and then there's actually 2 points where ServiceNow can play a valuable role in GitOps. And I think a first bit would be that if you have your recipes or your definitions nicely set up in Git, and you can, for example, set it all up, execute it all through Terraform, there's also a way to possibly expose it to the lesser technically equipped people by just offering it as a nice self-service request item in there. But actually, when you are spinning up those environments, or whether you're making those changes, there's also, of course, always the approval and the governance related steps in there. And I think you already touched upon that when you were talking about change management. This is also where actually in the steps of actually spinning it up and creating it, actually checking it with the proper change management procedure, of course, doing all of that automated in a way that you have all the information, then being able to assess that change automatically. And if there is no impact you expect that might knock over some critical systems, go ahead and approve it already, and streamline that all the way until the delivery.
Yeah, I like how you both all have brought in the need, the landscape of the need for GitOps. So, Nico, I think many of us, I've spent some time as a network engineer before moving into software, and or even for those of us, and even if you work in a lot of enterprise software, just large organizations, the change management meeting is so painful. And we're asking ourselves, I'm even wondering how many folks in the audience, I don't even know if we have a chat available on this one to say, like,
are we old enough, in the audience in general, to remember change advisory boards and change meetings?
Well, so the thing I'm curious is how many still have them? Like, do you have change management today, or do you not do change management? And I don't know if the chat will come to us if people have the ability to put it in chat.
I mean,
we'll
it's
see.
interesting because I talked to a lot of people about this, and I'm unashamed to say I'm ITIL certified. So I do have my IT Foundations diploma. I have the little book. Like I will say it, unashamedly, because I do think it's the right way to do things. But again, it's the interpretation of those procedures. Because we were, I think, discussing one point when we were sort of doing the prep meetings and so on, which was how effectively a merge request or a pull request is ultimately that the new version of that ticket where you have all the approvals, all the contextual information, where you don't have to chase people to go and review and comment. The procedure is always the same. The real question is how we make that procedure something that is actually a force of good, instead of just annoying people and forcing to sit on an hour listening to 20 changes that potentially they have no bearing or relevance in their day-to-day work, right?
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, to your point earlier, Poos, you're saying we go to the change management because otherwise maybe a critical service goes down. Right. So there's very real, high impactful, like when we have an outage, when we have an incident, when we have degraded performance.
Absolutely.
Those are painful. So there's reasons we need some type of change management. Absolutely. We just don't want the slow meeting.
No, exactly. It's quite funny because we one of the things we like to do is actually automate a large part of the change management. And to be able to do that, you go actually in talk with the people who assess the changes in the old way of working, right? And especially in larger organizations, you will have this buy model, right, where you still have your old stuff. You're not going to be able to pull the plug on your mainframe, even though you have a nice couple of modern things spinning. You'll have both, and then you ask questions like, well, what do you look at when you're assessing a change? And it's actually quite embarrassing that in many cases, they have a set of questions they try to ask, and nobody really knows the answer. And then in the end, okay, yeah, well, if nobody has objections, let's just do it. So, but of course, there are some things that are very critical, and which is in fact the impact on other applications. And this is of course something, if you have a proper CMDB setup and you have your relations mapped out, if you know what systems you are impacting or what services you're impacting, if you're changing a particular service or production environment, that could be very valuable. But that assessment can be automated, right? If we define the rules, it becomes even more reliable and a lot more consistent than if you have random people asking the questions. And still some some situations are too complex to be able to assess automatically, but then there would always be a fallback to actually do a manual check for the very complex situations.
So I think this is a critical point, even about the scope of technology that can be within your organization. So GitOps, I would say, as we're kind of honing on a definition, at a high level, it's just operations by Git merge request. At GitLab, we call it a merge request, and some other tools, it's called a pull request. But you're just doing operations by merge request. In order to do that, of course, you need your infrastructure and your environments, networking, et cetera, to be defined as code, stored in version in a Git repository. And then to Nico's point, that merge request, that becomes the change management process. This is where you can garner your approvals and do your coordination. And that is the fundamentals of GitOps. But who's, to your point, I heard a CIO describe it this way once. He said, I have a Smithsonian of technology. So, you know, it's just from every single era, there is some type of system that they're dealing with that you, for whatever reason, needs to be migrated or needs to be modernized and hasn't yet. So even as we're talking about high levels of automation, everything as code, asynchronous workflows, we can do that often with with the modern parts of our stack. But sometimes before we can even jump into a GitOps process, sometimes there's a modernization process, or there's some parts of our stack that'll never get there. And so this is where ServiceNow is powerful, because you can have a funnel for across the scope of that.
Exactly, you can bring it all together in one place and have that single pane of glass. Because I'm not going to pretend that ServiceNow will actually be good for actually version controlling your code, or actually doing anything with creating your environments from a bit of code. There's many things, many applications that do those things very well. But providing that insight and bringing that information together, that's I think the value it can add.
Yeah, and one of the ways I've seen it is, to your point, is about automating different flows. So you might have a manual process, and then you can, this needs to go through this set of approvals or this set of checks. And as many of those can be automated as possible. And so sometimes if your application or your infrastructure is legacy, it doesn't allow that type of automation, then maybe there's some manual steps to that you check the boxes or you fill out the ticket manually. If everything is automated, a lot of times via the API, you can follow the same ServiceNow flow, but your CI/CD is just in an automated way saying this box has been ticked, this approval has been met. And so you still have your compliance, but you've just automated the compliance. So you have speed and compliance.
William, always remember that, I mean, ultimately we're interacting with people, and you'll have, sort of a very interesting party in using Git as an interface, but then you'll have the rest of the organization who you have to interface with through some other means. I remember, sort of talking to people and going like, yeah, we're trying to drive every process through Git. And I went like, good luck having an accountant actually go and, merge something, because that's just not going to happen. And, in order for the process to work end to end, even if your interface is Git, the rest of the organization is going to most likely use another interface.
Right, and then I think the power is that you store the truth in a very flexible repository like Git, and that you do the execution of what you're delivering in a very powerful tool that's actually specialized for that. And then I think by combining various tools, you really end up with the sweet spot. I mean, I've seen, so from ServiceNow perspective, we are there's always been a lot of value in automating stuff, but the tricky part is always how do you set it up in a future-proof scenario, because very often those type of automations they change a lot. Or if you're, I don't know, if you're provisioning some environment, if you're hard coding in your request that the version of the environment, and you need to constantly update that, and that's not really the place to do those sort of things. So in that sense, I think if you have proper version control to that, I think, well, that's the benefits of Gits for automating your operations. I think for me that would be sort of the definition for GitOps.
Yeah. So to that point, as you see, and this is the one thing we'll get to at some point. What are the steps that you need to adopt? Maybe after we've had some discussion. But I'll just jump there for a moment to say that it's always a journey, right? Maybe the first step is just modernizing your infrastructure so that it can be defined as code, in a Terraform or a CloudFormation or some type of tool that allows you to do provisioning and configuration management as code. And then once you're there, then you need to version control it. And maybe this is even before you're doing any kind of sophisticated automation of your approval process or automated checks. Just using version control and getting used to that flow for a traditional IT operations team, maybe that is a set of competencies to learn. And so it's always a process as we go. And so my question is as you have seen organizations begin to adopt these DevOps and GitOps best practices, what kind of business impacts have you seen? We talked about the practices. How does it impact, the organization or the people?
You want to go, Gus? I'm happy to go.
Sure. No, sure. It's so I think it's very varying in that sense. So I think we've seen huge business impacts, especially. I mean, if you're standardizing and if the amount of effort you can save by automating stuff like provisioning environments and controlling the versions, and even just knowing what an environment is before you spin it up, rather than trying to have something and trying to find out afterwards, like, oh, I think we have a server over here and it's running this version of Linux. I don't know. I mean, the amount of effort that can be reduced in that is huge. And I think also you see that the people who actually the teams, the dev teams, also the op teams, and of course now the DevOps teams, they get to spend their time on a lot more fun activities and actually improving stuff, rather than constantly trying to solve the ongoing misery of things that keep falling over. So I think the benefits of that are quite clear. And then I think that creates a little bit of room for thinking about the next steps, right? How can we help those non techies who also need a particular environment for something, because they now keep constantly coming to me. They're sending me emails, they're sending me chats, and they always forget to send the right information with it, right? So if you can ask them in a structured way, and you can feedback directly what's going on, and always offer them the latest stuff, but also standardize it through your if you're a larger organization, the possibilities to, if one team has developed, has spent a lot of time setting up the perfect recipe for a particular testing environment, you shouldn't have to have the other team doing the same thing. If you can expose that and you can show that, and of course that's very, very beneficial. So I think that the potential benefits are huge, of course, but I'm not sure what your view is, Nico.
I want to recap for a moment. What I heard in there was the power of having your state defined as code is that it's self-documenting to a degree. You always need some type of additional documentation. Of course, we know everybody's favorite thing is documentation. So in some cases it may be lightweight, but if it's defined as code and you want to know what are the servers, what's in the environment, what versions is it running, all of these forensics that in a firefight during an incident would take an inordinate amount of time to try and figure out what's right. When you have that at your fingertips in an easy referenceable way, and you know what the current version is in the previous one, that's very, very powerful. That not only saves time so that your uptime is higher, and that impacts the business, but as you mentioned, just the real everyday work, how much fun is work for the engineering team and the operations team. GitOps makes work more fun.
Absolutely.
I don't think about that often enough, but it's super true. What do you think, Nico? So you hit the nail on the head. Like a lot of people, and again, I work a lot with the sales team, right? So you immediately hear, business value, and it's directly tied to like, yeah, what's my return of investment of bringing this tool? But it's just so much more. Like, with all due respect, who cares about quantifying the hours that people are going to save because they use GitOps? Just their general predisposition to work, considering that I had a role in an organization where I actually had to go and chase tickets through Teams, and I was an account manager, and hey, yeah, we need to do this change, and basically it was send the ticket to the network team, wait 6 hours, then go and chase the network team to pass the ticket to another team, and so on and so forth. Just a general predisposition. I don't think that's something that you can quantify and put a dollar value or euro value or pound value or francs, whatever. But ultimately, it just changed the whole approach to it just changes how people think about work. They go, they do their thing, and they go and follow something else. It's non-blocking. The handovers are handled elegantly by the tool, and that's pretty much it. Okay, you go, you do your work, and you don't have to chase people to do theirs.
Exactly. And also I think in terms of interacting with, for example, the business, if the tone shifts from always complaining why something is broke or why some things are taking 7 weeks or 2 months or 3 months, versus actually asking something, oh, that's a nice idea, let me see what I can do, and actually delivering that and thinking along, that's a totally different way. And I think all parties can win in the end.
And I think even as one of the activities that I enjoy doing is working with individual contributing engineers. A lot of times the way people adopt GitLab in a large organization is someone has just downloaded the open source code and spun up their own server, and on their team, and they love it and their team loves it, and now they need to sell someone who has a budget in order to expand this thing. And Nico, like you said, a lot of times the measurements that we look for are, well, what's the uptime, or are we getting software out faster, or are we reducing outages, or are we being more productive? And all of those are important, and we do measure those, and that's a way we essentially sell modernization. But a really important point for the enterprise, for large organizations, is the most expensive talent and the hardest to attract talent in your organization is your software engineering force, your software developers and your operations team. The people who build and the people who run your software are the hardest to attract talent and the hardest to retain talent.
Right, and you're gonna have to throw a lot of money at them if you want to keep them if they're not happy.
Right. Most software engineers that I talk to, most operations engineers, SREs, and platform engineers, the reason they go and they like to work in an org is not for the money, because a lot of different places will all pay them lots of money, but it's the place where they get to go and work on exciting things.
Exactly.
And so this is a business case. It's a business case for modernization. So obviously, some things are tough. You have the mainframe. That's going to take a little bit longer, but to sometimes the enterprise or the large organization can be scared of adopting new technologies, cloud native and GitOps, and they say we're not quite there yet. We don't want to move forward too fast. But there's a very real business return on if
Absolutely.
you are using new technologies. This is what folks who do software engineering enjoy working with, and by just moving a little bit step forward, you are increasing your talent pool, you're making your engineering force happier, and that leads to productivity. That's a big difference maker.
Right. And I think if we're talking business case, I mean, developer happiness is one thing, but another huge cost that especially larger organizations are making is more on the audit side of things, right? Showing that you are in control. We've already touched upon change control, of course, but also actually showing that these are my recipes, this is what I do, and having everything versioned and actually being able to access that information with a click of a button, it will make the audit process faster. But in addition to a lot of money that you pay to the auditor, you also have a lot of time that actually your people, those developers, that by the way will also not be very happy if they have to spend a day collecting evidence for a particular auditor. But if you have all that information present in a single system, and you can actually audit and monitor those controls automatically, which becomes a lot easier if you have that documented in a structured way. And that's just it's not documentation after the facts, but it's the documentation that decide on the facts in the end.
Rather than going out to separate tools, pulling data manually, normalizing that data, figuring out who made which change to what when. All of that information is now you get for free in a sense by using Git.
Yeah.
Git tells you what changed exactly to the line. Git tells you who made that change, when that change happened, and you can go back in time. So auditing and compliance, all of a sudden, yes, your evidence gathering is greatly reduced. It's in one place rather than scattered across. So the more things you can store in Git, you get that audit log. And the other value that I hear, so with the most organizations I talk to, it's not always about speed or developer happiness, although we all care about those things. But honestly, they list compliance. Improving their auditing and compliance is the #1 reason they want to adopt GitOps. And you get all these other benefits as well. But one that's interesting to me is the mean time to recovery. So when your infrastructure goes down and you're in a firefight, you are often trying to get everything up and going just by any means possible. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have the time to do the forensics investigation to figure out why it changed, right? But if everything is stored as code and it's versioned under Git, and your infrastructure, you have an incident, you get it up and going as fast as you can, but now you have a state of record of what the broken infrastructure was. You can set that up in another testing environment and now go and do all of the forensics and figure out why it broke and then engineer yourself out of that. And so this is something that, like a large GitLab customer that's doing GitOps, this is one of the values that they say is this really help their mean time to recovery, because they can separate the process of figuring out why from the process of getting it back up.
Right. And then if you connect that to your environment where you have your ITIL processes, right, your incident management, you have your CMDB there, you pull that or you expose that information from Git there, and you can actually see, okay, this version was applied to this particular environment which we spun up at this time, and then this happened, and you can see that even visually on the timeline. You can also do a quick check, of course, okay, what other environments might be running the same version, and could they be impacted as well? And then meantime to resolve is a very important one, but preventing additional impacts, of course, that's even better. So yeah.
You know, I heard that a lot of organizations going like, yeah, no, we can do this, we can do DevOps, we can do GitOps, because, you know, we have to follow ITIL procedures. And somehow there is this ingrained view that, you know, those two contradict, where, you know, let's be honest, like the people that are developing these practices today, they do it based on A, industry best practice, which arguably is ITIL, and B, just the modernization of that. No one is saying stop doing change management, stop doing incident management, you know, stop analyzing changes. The only thing we're saying is no one said it had to be a call. It's not on the ITIL books, I can tell you that. No one said it had to be a call. Okay, it says what information you have to collect, you know, how you collect information about a configuration item and so on. But ultimately, no one said it had to be a call. So what you're doing here is just honestly supersizing ITIL and doing it to a level of control and a level of detail that I think, you know, maybe 20, 25 years ago, we just couldn't. We didn't have the tool, right? We also didn't, arguably, we didn't have the scale of IT we have today, but we didn't have the tooling back then. Now we do have the tooling.
Right. And also 25 years
Putting that
ago,
out on Twitter, no one said it had to be a call.
it's a good quote.
That's a quote of the day. What were you saying, Hoos?
Yeah, well, also 25 years ago, many businesses were for their core business not reliant on their IT. And now, if every huge business for sure is if all their systems or even a few business critical systems go down, there's people around the world that are not able to work because they cannot exit. I think we've seen it at the beginning of COVID when everyone was forced to work at home, and the remote working facilities were not scaled or scalable to meet the demand of people working from home. There have been thousands of people that couldn't work for days because the technology. So in that sense, having cloud native applications running which you can scale at the point that you need them is also a very good business case. So yeah, indeed, the importance has also been rising a lot, hence the
Yeah, I think this is a great analogy for it that many of us can feel right now because COVID has been so disruptive. And at GitLab has been a remote company almost since GitLab was 7 employees. It was all remote, and now it's 1,300 employees. It's the largest all remote company, and we were remote before COVID. So we have perfected the art of remote, I might say. Maybe not perfected, but have a really great reference for how to do it and how to do it well. And we've been doing that for a long time. And one of the things that we do is, because we're so influenced by the Git flow, this asynchronous of I can propose a change, then this other person on their own time frame can go and review that change and leave me comments in line on the code. And then I go through and address those in my own time and make the updates. Everything happens. You can be around the world in different time zones. You make your comments while I'm sleeping, etc., or while I'm taking my kids to school. That asynchronous workflow is very powerful. And
William, I can vouch for that.
This quote of no one said it had to be a call.
Yeah.
A lot of colleagues that I talk to, they say, okay, ever since COVID, I get up in the morning and I get on a video call, and I'm on the video call all day until the end of the day. And I just tell them, you're doing it wrong. That COVID remote, that is not real. Trust me, I've been doing remote work way before COVID. You have to figure out how to write it down, write something down. That is a powerful way. No one said it had to be a call. So anyway, sorry, what were you saying, Nico?
Yeah, so if you look at my, let's say, indirect team, we are about 100 people that are distributed from, again, West Coast to Sydney, right? And a lot of collaborations, collaboration still happens in Git, because it is the most effective way to do things. Every time we're working on a shared project, where that is, I know, demos we prepare, or labs, or documentation, or what have you, even most of our slide work that we use sort of customer facing, like to do training workshops and so on, that is on Git, period. Like, we have no better way of having a team that is so distributed to collaborate. Right, we, much like GitLab, we never had an office. Well, we have an office in San Francisco, but our team was never in an office. So every time we have to collaborate on content, or we have to do something that is sort of outside the remit of our local work, hell, even the team in London, we're talking about 4 or 5 people, and they're using Git all of the time, because when they are together having a beer outside business hours. They are not working together in the same room.
Are you stating here that Git is so easy that even salespeople can do Git?
So I didn't say sales.
I wouldn't say it was so easy, but at GitLab, the salespeople do use Git.
Nice.
Not something I necessarily recommend to everybody, but to your point, Nico, there's a little bit off the topic of GitOps, but there's a lot you can store in a version control. So for example, we have our internal wiki is really actually just a website. We actually make it public, but you don't have to, but it's a website and it's written in Markdown. And Markdown is something that almost anybody can use. So literally
even
sales, my wife is a paralegal in the legal department. She uses Git every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sales folks, legal, marketing, some of those practices can spread out, but for the focus of this call, when we're just talking about it doesn't have to be a call, you can store it as code. And there's a lot of infrastructure as code tools out there. I would say the major components to GitOps are storing the infrastructure as code or the environment state as code. And then your change management process is now becomes the merge request or the pull request. That is your point of inflection where you, and then the last component is the automation, the CI/CD. So any changes, you no longer manually applying changes to your infrastructure, but when that code is, you have a branch and that branch represents, that Git branch of code represents the environment. So maybe your main branch represents your production environment. You make a branch to go and configure your changes, and then you request to merge it back in. And when you merge that code back in, that CI/CD then enacts that change in the environment. That to me, that's the bones of a GitOps operation. And you can flesh it out from there and add more to it, but that's the core of how it works.
Yeah. So ultimately, you add sort of, you have the important part is having tooling and people collaborate through that sort of single unit, which is the merge request or the pull request. Okay. Ultimately, when you look at where it is your CI processes or your ServiceNow processes, or in our case Terraform Enterprise, would actually pushes information into the merge request or the pull request. You have to have on that unit all the contextual information that is required for a human to go and make that decision to merge. And some of that is automatic, and some of that is sort of people workflow driven.
Right, and I think when it comes to especially the larger organizations, the basis of your change will indeed be that merge request where you have all those details. But especially in larger organizations where you have also a lot of different type of organizations which are not necessarily a merge or even commit based, right? There could be any type of change. In fact, in many organizations, they still have servers sitting in racks in their basement. That still happens as well. And actually, if they take out the server of rack A and move it to another room because they need to, I don't know, redo the airco or something, that would also be a change, of course. And I don't think GitOps would be suitable for moving. Well, actually, it might be.
Well, I think you touched on that. It's a process that you adopt over time. Not everything is going to be stored in Git. So although you can get into these powerful benefits, I think this is how we approach it. I wonder if we have questions from chat. I love where the conversation is going, but I want to see if we have from our audience. Chandan, I want to make sure that we got to any of our audience questions.
Sure. We do have some questions, so I'm going to read those out for you. Just to ensure, you can hear me, right?
Yep. Yeah, loud and clear.
Coming through.
Perfect. The first question that I have for you is in GitOps versioning definitions and declarations and be able to pull or use them in an automated way?
Is GitOps versioning and declarations to be able to pull them in an automated way?
Yeah.
That's the question.
I think the answer is yes.
I think yes. I think that the components of GitOps are in that question. You're versioning, it's your code. You're automating the changes. And not to get too deep into it, I think there's two types of GitOps that I've seen, and this depends on just whatever tooling you have. At GitLab, we actually have both of these. One is the push. So your CI/CD tool takes, something happens in Git, you make the merge, the CI/CD runs, and it pushes the changes to your infrastructure. The other is a pull, where and we call this agent-based, where you have an agent running in the infrastructure. This tends to only happen with Kubernetes. So if you're not using Kubernetes, then running a running agent within that infrastructure clusters becomes a lot more challenging. But with Kubernetes infrastructures, maybe you have an agent and it's just constantly monitoring the state of the infrastructure to say, is it the same as my source of truth in Git? And if it's not, reconcile the two. And so it pulls changes into the Kubernetes cluster. So they mentioned a pull versus a push. I would call that both GitOps, and it just depends on your tooling. But the components are there. Version control, change via merge request, automated application.
Awesome. I'm going to move on to the next one. So the next one is, I'm using GitOps integration with CI/CD pipelines, secrets with Vault and Git as a single source of truth, but I'm still being challenged by the CAB meetings. How do you convince that we do not need these meetings? That's the question.
Right, I think I can take that one. So this is actually a scenario that we see a lot with various organizations, that the first of all, the people doing that, they might even feel threatened if you say that you don't need that anymore. And I think what it in the end boils down to, what we see is that if we integrate such a pipeline, and before the deployment actually goes through, we integrate that with the ServiceNow change management module, for example, that this change process can still be there, and we can still make it visible to them that all the steps they normally take are actually being taken, right? We attach all the right evidence with actually the commits that we pull from Git, even the work items that we pull from the Agile tool. We could even have the test results showing up there, and then we could state, look, because we can see that all the user stories are closed, that the commits have all been messaged correctly. We did a couple of automated tests, they passed. Actually, in fact, we did a static code analysis, and we saw that in fact all the rules were complied with. For example, we can see in the code that there are no ports being opened that should not be open, and for these and these and these and these reasons, we automatically approve it. They will still have the visibility, they can still see it, they don't lose control, because I think that's the change management is all about control, and they actually have a responsibility to be in control. So if you take the process out of their hands, they lose control, and naturally they're against that. But if you keep them in control, and also in case there are certain exceptions, for example, you might need that firewall port to be open specifically for the application you're using it for, then you could ask them, in fact, for approval, or you could attach approval from security that they are in fact okay with this situation. But I think the key is keep them involved, inform them, let them see that they're still in control, but also it really helps them, right? Often the traditional CAP teams are heavily overloaded. They have a backlog sometimes of 4 to 6 weeks. Some changes that took half an hour to develop have to sit and wait 6 weeks before they are queued up for actually being approved. So automating 80% of what they have to assess will speed up that 80% massively, but it will even speed up the remaining complex 20%, and it will enable them to do a better job in the end.
Yeah, what do you think, Nico? I think this is a great question to close on. I have some thoughts, but I know you.
The short answer is no one said it had to be a call. That is the short answer.
What do you do when you tell that to your colleagues and they say, I still like the call? How do you address that scenario?
Honestly, if you like the call, call me. Call me anytime. I'm happy to clarify anything. But
it doesn't have to be.
Exactly, it doesn't have to be. I participated on my fair share of those, and I can tell you that probably 9 out of 10 times I was presenting a change and I was giving detail, and the DBA couldn't even relate the information I was providing to the actual servers where that DBA was running engines. That is the honest truth about the CAPs. That is why this process is so much more virtuous than the traditional change advisory board. Again, no one is saying get rid of the change advisory board. The board exists. The call is what doesn't exist, because ultimately you're going to, let's say I'm going back to my old days as a sysadmin. and I'm saying, yeah, I'm going to sort of redeploy these application servers because, you know, we do it immutably, and we're going to do it with the latest version of Wildfly or JBoss or whatever it's called these days. Ultimately, I'm going to go and mark as approvers everyone in that application team, so they can go and review and see exactly from the code which version of Wildfly I'm going to be deploying, and go and say yay or nay. And that is much better information that they were going to get on the phone. So ultimately, we're not disbanding the cab, we're actually making it useful.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll share a closing thought there. I know we're just about out of time, but the way I interpret this question is we have a change management team, we have a change management process, and it's not working. And we're asking, how do I change the change management process? What is the change management process for changing my change management? It's a little bit meta way of thinking. And so this is often the case with any type of technology modernization, especially when I talk to IT leaders. Often the technology is not the problem, it's the culture and the people. And we need to remember as technologists that we're always dealing with people.
Exactly.
And
you cannot check in a new version of the culture into Git, get a merge request over with, and then it's done.
And yes, and so this is true. So in many ways, you cannot treat people like code. But my recommendation is actually you should treat people like code. And I'll tell you what I mean by that is because you would not make a merge request that was 1,000 changes to 1,000 files, or maybe you do, and it's a mess to review, and it has 1,000 merge conflicts, and it never goes in. And so, if we're as platform engineers, as software developers, we've learned over time working with Git. Those of us that have used it for a long time, the smaller you make the change, that small change is very powerful. So many small changes are what leads us to the reliability. It's what leads us to they're easier to reason about and pull things out that don't work. This is how we approach our software development, is many little small iterations. But all of a sudden we go to the change management board and we say, you know, I stuck everything in Git, you are obsolete, let's get rid of this.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you're saying to the organization, here's this 1,000 line merge request to 1,000 files, and I'm not expecting any merge conflicts, right? You know, the old axiom is maybe boil the frog slowly.
Yeah.
And so as you kind of approach your colleagues, think about what's the smallest difference. So some ways I've seen this happen is maybe it's just one project. Sure, this meeting is kind of obsolete. It pains me to go to it because everything's automated, but I'm going to go to it anyway. I'm going to value my colleagues. They're entrenched in it. I'm going to value their state of mind. But I'm just going to ask them, maybe just for this one project, or for this one team, or for this one service or application, can we try this automation thing, right? And I call that the lighthouse project. It's almost like the lighthouse that avoids you from running into the cliffs, and it leads you to the way. And so to Nico's point about now all of a sudden you can show them, look, we're not obsoleting you, we're making you more powerful. We're not giving you less information, we're giving you more. And if you can show them with a little small way how that works, sometimes that little small change, and then maybe you can add one more. And so doing that iterative change, the same way you approach an application or your infrastructure, that is how I see organizations change as well. With that, I think we're just about on time, but Nico, closing final thought.
Final thoughts. If you had been in the industry as long as I had, you would be jumping on this. I know it's always hard to, you know, especially in big organizations, to change, you know, human processes. Funny enough, technology is easier to change than human processes. My advice is, you know, if you truly believe in this, if you're having trouble going and recruiting and convincing people and forming, if you will, a coalition of the willing to go and implement some changes, my advice is start looking into doing processing parallel. Okay, effectively keep everything on Git, keep doing your change, your normal change management, and when you have enough information, just go and present your arguments. Just show that you have been doing, you know, both processes at the same time, And with GitOps, you have way more information, way more detail, and there is a lot more insight that can be shared with the rest of the organization. That is my honest advice. Be patient, because I work in large organizations and I know how hard sometimes it is. But yeah, be patient.
Sounds great. Who's final thoughts?
Yeah. I'm gonna say I'm really inspired by the quote. Nobody said it has to be a call. I'm definitely going to keep that in there. No, I think it was. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm kind of sad that the hour is already almost gone, but yeah, I think there's a lot of possibilities, and actually, I think to the point of making it happen. Of course, technology will not change the people, but if you deploy technology in a way that it can help people seeing that the new situation is actually a lot brighter than the past, that can actually also really drive progress.
Well, I want to thank you so much, both of you, for being on the call, Chandan for hosting us. Again, I'm William from GitLab. I would say, is the next step. We're here and we want to help you. If you are interested in ServiceNow technologies, if you are interested in HashiCorp technologies, a lot of those are enablers of GitOps or GitLab. We want to help you and continue this conversation. So you can add a question, you can type in a chat. We'll look at those logs after this webcast is over. Raise your hand in the interface. Any of those interactions, and our teams will follow up with you to keep the conversation going. So we certainly have enjoyed everyone being on this webcast today, on this call. And so now let's go and continue asynchronous through some text communication. Chandan, I think that wraps it up for us. We really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you very much, William, Nico, and Hus for the wonderful panel discussion. And it seems so much like a conversation between three experts, and that was fun, and that was keeping everybody on. Yeah, once again, thanks all of you, and thanks to each and every one of the registrants and the attendees who took time to be part of this session. So we will now be processing the recording of this. So those of you who want a copy of this will eventually hear from the team at GitLab, who will reach out to you with the copy of the recording, and then subsequently, in order to have conversations with you on how they can help you and make a difference in your processes. Once again, thank you so much, and have a nice rest of the day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.